family. Welcome to another edition of the Sister Shanice Show. I want to thank you so much for watching this show and also for sharing with family and friends. As you know, it's so important that we have and we share our perspective on issues that impact on us, which is why I'm doing this show, because I feel there's just not enough, narrative out there that's reflective of our views and our opinions. So this show, the Sister Shanice Show, is looking at issues from an African-centered perspective. So please do share and let's get talking. On today's show, I'm going to be talking about Sadiq Khan's decision to back a proposal to establish and build a slavery museum in London, UK. So what is our view and opinions of this? As far as I know, we haven't been consulted. So I've consulted with members of our community on my radio show. I had an open phone in. We had a bit of a discussion about it. People were letting us know their views and opinions. I'll include some of those views in the video today as well. But for those of you that don't know, it may have escaped you, but there has been recommendations to establish a slavery museum in London, UK. And the idea is that this slavery museum would challenge contemporary racism and also the legacy of colonialism. Really? We were asking, how is a slavery museum going to do that? Well, and also the other question is, what is contemporary racism? So racism has been modernized, has it? Has it been sort of accepted that racism, has actually changed in its nature? We know it's more subtle, we know it's more insidious, we know it's more covert than it was previously, and back in the days it's not as overt as it was here in the UK in the 50s and 60s. You don't get openly called the N-word, you don't get openly abused in the way that we used to, so it has changed in that regard, but the impact of racism is still there. The discrimination, the suffering, all is still there. So what is contemporary racism? That's an interesting one. Anyone know, please, elaborate in the comments below what contemporary racism is. And the other challenge that this museum is proclaiming to be able to do is to challenge the legacy of colonialism. Really? How can a museum challenge the legacy of colonialism? I am yet to be convinced of that, but we've certainly got some ideas on our own as to how racism can be a challenge and addressed, and how colonialism can also be challenged and addressed. But let's have a look at this article. It says that the new museum was one of several proposals that were submitted to Khan in a report. Really? So what were the other recommendations? We don't know what they were. It may have been that those other recommendations would have been better suited to challenge the issue of racism, or so-called contemporary racism, and the legacy of colonialism. Now, I don't know what those other recommendations were, but what I do know is that there was a meeting that was held by the Runnymede Trust. Let me just scroll down and find it first of all. Now, apparently the idea for this slavery museum came from a report that was published by the Fabian Society that's described as a left-wing think tank. Now, why would anyone who wants ideas about how to challenge racism and the legacy of colonialism go to a left-wing think tank for ideas when there are Africans here in London, there are black people, here in London, UK, in large numbers who, would be only too willing and ready to give their ideas and suggestions as to how we think the legacy of colonialism and how we think racism ought to be challenged. But no, instead, they've gone to this Fabian Society, this left-wing think tank that thinks that one of Khan's priorities for re-election ought to be, the proposal to build a slavery museum. Really? That is in no way going to challenge racism. That is in no way going to, challenge Britain's history of colonialism. You know, how can a slavery museum do anything like that? If you want ideas, if you want to know how to challenge racism, talk to the people who are directly impacted by racism on a daily basis. Talk to the countries that are impacted by colonialism until today. That is the way that you're going to get answers if you're genuinely looking for proposals on how to challenge racism and how to address colonialism. You know, this is 2019. We have a voice. We're no longer muffled. We've no longer got, you know, the iron over our mouths so that we can't talk. We are a people now who have views and have opinions, and we're living in a day and age where we can express them. So talk to us if you want views and opinions. Don't go behind our backs and talk to Fabian societies and Runnymede Trust and the like about issues that's impacting on us. It's just unacceptable. And if you need a think tank, a black think tank, and one doesn't already exist, set one up. Invest some finances into setting up a black think tank so that we can express our views and opinions on a range of issues that impact on us. We can express our opinions on the economy, on economics, on business, on education, and on a whole range of other social, political and economic issues that's impacting on us as a people. Set up a black think tank so that you've got that body to consult with. Well, you know, because that doesn't exist, and because, you know, I don't know, maybe the department was too lazy to find African people to consult with, this report, this capital gains report, has been written by Omar Khan, who is the director of equalities and the think tank at Runnymede Trust. And he writes, "It is unacceptable that the capital city of a nation that built a global empire and its wealth in large as a result of its role in the slave trade has no significant museum or monument marking the role that London and Britain played in these historic atrocities." Well, here we go again. People who don't look like us, don't have our interests at heart, talking about what they think, you know, ought to be a mark in this nation about the atrocities that our ancestors suffered. No thank you, Omar Khan. You don't speak on our behalf. Just because you might be the director of equalities on some think tank doesn't mean that you're able to think how we think, feel how we feel, or think that you have our interests at heart. If you want to know what we're thinking, if you want to know how we're feeling, talk to us. As a man, if you want to know how women feel, what women's priorities are, talk to women. If you want to know how African people are feeling and what we think on particular issues, talk to us. And if you do talk to us, then at least have the decency to listen. Yeah, because I do note when I was looking at the Runnymede Trust that there was a consultation event that happened a little while back actually, and the audio transcript is actually available on the Runnymede Trust website. And this particular consultation event was a question time style event, and it was held in association with the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool. And they were actually talking about race equality, and they were asking members of the public and government officials to attend and share their views about how to deal with racism and inequalities within society. So that sounds really good, doesn't it? You're inviting people to ask their views and opinions on how they feel about racism and how it can be challenged, etc. And when you listen to the transcript, you will actually hear that there was a recommendation, there were recommendations that were talking about one of the ways to challenge racism is to create better opportunities for people to go into business, for African people, black people to go into business. It was actually saying that when you consider our numbers within the community, we are, you know, overrepresented in the number of people who want to start up in business, who want to go into business for themselves, self-employment. So you would consider that, you know, if someone was genuinely interested in taking on the views and opinions that were expressed at that particular meeting, that one of the recommendations that was being made to Sadiq Khan was that he should maybe invest more money in business startups for African people, black people in this country, that maybe instead of building a museum, we should be building business enterprise centres, using those funding and resources that they're talking about for a slavery museum to invest in money, capital grants, capital loan schemes for black businesses, so we can be, you know, go into business, because we all know only too well that we are grossly underrepresented when it comes to businesses. We're grossly underrepresented when it comes to getting access for finances to start up our own businesses. We're grossly underrepresented when it comes to getting some of these properties in these regenerated areas. You know, prior to regeneration, we may have been the shopkeepers, the shop owners in some of those places, but after regeneration and the price hike, you know, our people are priced out of the market. So you would think that there would be some schemes to ensure that, you know, we're not priced out of the market, and that there is access to our people to run their own business, that there's access for young people coming in behind us as well, so they don't have to join the dole queue. But no, at that meeting, that equalities meeting that was attended by the Liverpool Slavery Museum people, they end up recommending a slavery museum in London. How convenient. Yes, so whose interests are being served there? Ours? It certainly doesn't sound like it, does it? So let's continue in this article and see what comes up next. So in this article he continues, and this is Omar Khan continuing. It is no surprise that British public has no real understanding of the role we played, yes, because Asians were the indentured servants. They were, yes, used in a particular way during our slave trade as well, and they did reap the economic benefits by being, you know, allowed to run the businesses in our communities, and the legacy of that is still continuing in today. So I understand what Omar is saying there when he says it's no surprise that the British public has no real understanding of the role we played. Is that the role that Asian played in the slave trade that you're wanting to highlight? Why not have an Asian slavery museum then in that case? You know, and it goes on to say that the British public has no real idea of the role that we played in facilitating the slave trade and its terrible impact on the millions of people. Well, my news for you, Omar Khan, I don't know where you went to school, but I went to school here in the UK, and slavery is on the curriculum. It was on the curriculum when I was at the school, and it's still on the curriculum. The children are taught about the atrocities of the slave trade. They are taught, you know, about the role of the Europeans, the role of the Asians, and the role, you know, of Africans during those awful demonic days, yeah? And, you know, if Britain wanted to talk about in any sympathetic way about the atrocities that was experienced by the hundreds of millions of Africans during that time, well, you and your team would consult with the descendants of those people. But since you don't, let me just tell you how it feels, yeah? The idea of a slave trade museum or a slavery museum to me actually feels like pouring salt on an open wound. Yes, an open wound. There are a lot of people, the descendants of those who suffered those atrocities, who are still suffering, yeah? Who are still suffering the effects of those 500 or so years of absolute hell. Yeah, and to propose that there's a museum that you know, to us glorifies these wicked atrocities is like pouring salt in the wound. Yes, it is. Let me give you another example what it's like. It's like a rapist, for example, who's raped thousands of women, being able to have a museum so that his descendants could walk around that museum and see, you know, images of the women and read stories about the women that he raped. and then the children of those victims having to read those stories and relive the atrocities that their parents suffered and live it over and over again. Or, you know, having a paedophile that has abused thousands of children, having a museum with images of children and stories of those children that were abused and how they were abused, and the descendants and the family members of those victims, yeah, the descendants of those victims, actually reading about the suffering and the abuse that those children went through. And on the other hand, you know, the descendants of the perpetrator having to read about it as well and relive that experience. It's absolutely disgusting. It's uncivilized, and there must be a better way of challenging racism and colonialism. Have you heard of reparations? If not, go and check that out as a solution. What else have we got here? So, you know, in my opinion, through the education system, the British society have a very good idea and a very good understanding of what happened during those demonic years, okay? And what we also know is that, you know, slavery was never intended to end. The British never wanted to end slavery. If it wasn't for those Africans in the Caribbean and in Africa rising up and having to go to the extreme of chopping off the heads of those enforcers of our enslavement, if they weren't prepared to burn down those plantations with the family members in it, if they were not prepared to make, you know, the whole economy of our enslavement unmanageable and uneconomically viable, slavery would have continued until today. So don't try and give us any Wilberforce story about how slavery ended. We can look, if we want to know more about enslavement, on the internet. We can just Google it and find out. Everybody can Google and find out about those years of enslavement. We certainly do not need a slavery museum during these times in order for that to actually happen. So I strongly disagree with the proposal for a slave museum here in London, and most of the people that rang in, well, all of the people who rang in on my radio show actually totally disagreed with it again as well, and asked me to do a show on this, and in the hope that the message will actually reach Sadiq Khan, that it will reach the Fabian Society, that it will reach the Runnymede Trust as well, and you know, bring about a change in the attitude, you know, of those people who seem to talk about us as if we can't talk for ourselves. It's not acceptable during these times. You know, there is at least 5,000 years of documented African history. 5,000 years that go back, you know, from those glory and ancient times of Africa in, you know, Egypt in Africa, you know, and what the life of Africans was like prior to the invasion of the Europeans. 5,000 years of documented African history. But no, rather than talk about those 5,000 glorious golden years of ours, you want to focus on the 500 years when we were, you know, terrorized and treated in the most brutal, wicked and evil way as a people. It's totally unacceptable. There's no context to this proposal whatsoever. In fact, I don't even want to read any more of this article. This, you know, racism, contemporary racism, there's no such thing as contemporary racism. Racism and the hatred of us as a people, whether we're living here in the UK or the Caribbean and Africa, is as real today as it was yesterday. And let me make another thing clear. Africans never ever wanted to be enslaved, never accepted being enslaved, and as far as we were concerned, we were kidnapped from our homeland, we were held as hostages, yeah, and we were used as forced labor. Yeah, the word slave comes from the Slavs. The first slaves were Europeans. Yeah, the Slavs were the slaves. We were kidnapped children and kidnapped people who were held hostage against their will and were forced, yeah, to carry out labor. You had nearly 500 years of free labor from our people. What we ought to be talking about now is reparations, how you're going to repair the damage, how you're going to pay back for those 500 years of unpaid labor. And a museum just doesn't cut it. Sister Shanice, out of here. No, I'm not out of here yet. So let me bring in some of the comments from some of the listeners who decided to phone in on the show and air their views and opinions as to what they thought about the proposal to build a slavery museum in London.
In terms of the question, I think it's disgraceful that Sadiq Khan and his fellow Asians should be speaking on our behalf about and talking about racism, so-called racism, when in fact I could actually anti-black racism. Right, and Asian people, so-called Asian people, i.e. India, Pakistanis, etc., they have more anti-African bigotry in them than the white Caucasians, right? So I think it's very rich and very hypocritical from a so-called Asian Muslim like Sadiq Khan to come and tell us, right, about they're going to do this and going to do that. Fine, you do what you want to do, right? But I don't necessarily buy into that. But I think it's very rich for Asian, so-called Asian, you come and talk to us about so-called contemporary racism. When we see racism when we have or rather we have massive anti-black, anti-African racism from you Asians. So what are you Asian people, right, going to do about your anti-African bigotry towards us? Don't start pointing a finger at the Caucasian because we know about them. But you try and make a list. You're down with this, or you're trying to be like this. Or you want to, have this kind of kindred spirit of us, but you're damn hypocrites, right? So I don't need the Asian man to come and, fight my corner. As African people, as black people, we are more than capable of fighting our own corner.
They should have had our opinion, and they could have started from when we were kings and queens, how great we were.
I think, you talked about a museum of legacy.
Yeah.
Isn't that exactly what the British Museum is? All of these places are funded, have been able to survive because primarily of African artifacts. The biggest show or the biggest attraction in the British Museum is that of the Egypt.
Yeah, now that's an interest.
That legacy, but it's the way it's presented and put across. It's not really represented that this is actually black African history. People are looking at Egypt as though it's some separate entity from Africa, from Al-Qaeda. There's a lot of people who sometimes go to Egypt on holiday and they don't even realize that they are in Africa. The whole thing about contemporary racism.
No, I have never heard that term before. Enlighten me, my brother.
It's like, no, I'm just saying, does it sound like modern day slavery? A way of trying to water it down and make it applicable to what's going still within a system that has nothing to do with us. Because even in modern day slavery, the so-called term, we're not perpetuating it. And even if we could say that in modern day slavery, we're being subjected to it, i.e. the many going over to Saudi Arabia, dying to get across the waters for what are perceived to be a better life. So this whole contemporary racism seems another way of offsiding the real issue of racism so that they can water it down to bring themselves into a picture. Do you remember as well, aren't these Asians indentured servants? They're indentured servants. So even in the past, their whole history in regards to how they've got to that economic position is because of being given an advantage because they're Asians and they got that from the Caucasian.
And as Brother Kwame said, it's very ironic that Sadiq Khan is the one putting this proposal forward when India itself is central to the continued oppression of Africa and Africans on an economical level globally, followed in quick pursuit by China. All of them are in it together. When you talk about modern day slavery, India, China, Singapore, the Philippines, all of that region there are part and parcel of the modern day slavery of African people. None of them want to see Africa and her children rise, and they're all working together with the white gloves to keep us the low. As I said, I can't stay long. Brother Kwame, pick up from me and carry on.
Asian people do not like black people. There is a long history of this, right? If you put so-called contemporary history on it, from Gandhi, so-called Gandhi, right, through to the caste in India, through to even when we live with them in the Caribbean, in places like Guyana, places like Jamaica, places like Trinidad, we don't get on. In Africa, in places like Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, we don't get on with them, right? So there's a lot, and even in this country, we don't get on with them. So there's a long history, right, of people from the Indian subcontinent, and that's who they really love. They're actually half caste Indian from the subcontinent. There's a long history, right, of anti-African bigotry towards us. And Sadiq Khan, if you've got any decency in you, if you've got a shred of decency in you, right, I'd rather you focus your attention, right, on talking to your own people about how you're going to deal with the rampant anti-black racism that exists within your community, rather than coming with a cheap stunt about, oh, let's build a museum in London to appease the dumb ones in our community. No. We would do what we need to do. You would do what you would do. I don't support it. We got to do and think for ourselves. We got to do as Africans, for ourselves. And if they put that thing there, right, it's going to be as usual a whitewash. You understand what I'm saying? They'll tell half the story as usual, right? And they'll probably put in their Wilberforce as being the liberator of black people and this slave owner, who now saw the light and became a champion of abolition. Bullcrap.
It's absolutely clear to us, those years of our captivity, of our kidnapping and being held hostage and bondage was the wicked, evil doings under a brutal system, and the people who implemented that brutality and the beneficiaries who are benefiting from the raping and the pillaging of Africa until today need to be sitting around the table and talking about how they can repay and repair the damage and compensate those victims and those countries that suffered as a result of those years of enslavement. Those are the discussions that the Khans need to be having, if you want to talk about how you can address racism and inequality in society. Or set up a black think tank and we'll give you the ideas and the solutions. Family, you have been in tune to the Sister Shanice Show. Just giving you my views and opinions from an African-centered perspective on what I think about Sadiq Khan's proposal to build a slave museum here in London. There's one already in Liverpool. Anyone want to know about it? Anyone want to see it? Go to Liverpool. Sister Shanice out of here. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. One love, family.